Hey guys, welcome back to the MLS Updater with me, Mike Bryce, and happy to say once again we've got Peter Galindo back to chat some more Canadian MLS. Peter, how you doing?
Good, Mike. Yeah, never a dull moment when it comes to the Canadian MLS teams, I think, as we found out through the first 7 or 8 games of the season.
Exactly. It's been different stories, hasn't it? Really, for all three sides, nothing going particularly smoothly. I don't think we can say.
Yeah, and I mean, some teams are more confusing than the others, which I'm sure we're going to get into, and others are probably more peculiar or sticky situations than others too. So it's all very fascinating.
Yeah, let's kick off with one of those sort of probably more sticky situations over in CF Montreal. The Hernan Lasada era is up and running, and it's not off to the best of starts. 3 points so far at the bottom of the East, a minus 14 goal difference. They've only scored 3 goals, all of them in their one win over Philadelphia Union. I mean, we looked at obviously the amount of outgoings at the over the off season, but we spoke. I remember we speaking just before the season. We thought, okay, well, Alistair Johnson's gone, but Aaron Herrera's here. Victor Wanyama's re-signed. Samuel Piet's still
Mhm.
there. This Piet injury's really taken a toll on that. The
Yeah.
defense. There's another few injuries there. Georgi Mihailovic has gone, but maybe we'll see one of these younger players step up. Kone's left a bit of a one-off player, but it's really shown how much of a huge step players like Kone made coming into the team with these youngsters coming in who haven't. I mean, it's not their fault to have not become
Of
Canadian
course.
internationals overnight like Kone or basically did, but it's been a very difficult start for them.
It has, and the injuries haven't helped for
Mm,
sure because Joel Waterman began the season injured. Kamal Miller was battling through some things. Then he got hurt again just before the international break, and that carried into post international break a little bit because I don't think he was quite fully recovered. And if anything, maybe just was still a bit rusty. And then he gets traded. They
yeah.
try to add to their firepower a little bit. I know that Bryce Duke ended up starting over the weekend and looked okay.
Mm,
But I think there's just a litany of issues, some that I probably didn't see coming. Because before the season, I came on here and said, you know what, they'll probably be okay. They'll be a
mm,
bubble playoff team, maybe in terms of their ceiling, but I never expected them to be this poor in terms of how
mm.
they've actually performed. And I just think it's a lot of I feel like it's a lot of square pegs and round holes so far, in that Hernan Losada, he likes to play direct, he likes to play very fast-paced, attack-minded stuff, but he usually leaves a lot to be desired defensively. So as much as you might be creating offensively, defensively you're going to be conceding a lot. The problem is they haven't been creating a lot offensively to
No.
supplement the poor defensive performances. So really it's sort of a two-layered issue in that if you can't score and you're not getting players into the box, if you're not getting shots off, and that's really the one major difference I think I've seen from last year compared to this year,
Mm.
is that there aren't a lot of risk takers in the final third for Montreal. All too often, we've seen a lot of individualism with the dribbling. They've maybe tried to cut inside and have a shot from distance. No one's trying to get into the box. No one's making runs into the box. It was a bit better over the weekend against DC, but still, I think, far from ideal. And then the fact that you have the Samuel Piet injury, the fact you're still trying to maybe figure out where Nathan Saliba fits in all this, I think it's just a litany of issues that, to be honest, the first 2, 3 months you maybe expected, but probably you weren't expecting them to be this poor overall, just in
Mm.
terms of the amount of goals they conceded and how few they've scored, right?
Exactly. With Lazar, like you say, he has his way of playing, and you expect them to be improve on one of those areas. Well, after sort of 2, 3 games where okay, we're having some issues, would he shore up the defense a little bit more, or would he add a little bit more intensity going forward and trying to actually get into the box? But he doesn't seem like they don't seem to have affected either end of the pitch. It's still been a very continuous sort of run of how they've been playing throughout this whole period. I mean, it's 8 games now so far where there doesn't seem to be any sort of peaks where you think, oh, okay, well, they're starting to do this a little bit better.
No, exactly. And the constant rotation isn't helping either. That's
Mm,
obviously sustained through the injuries, but yeah, you can absolutely see that that's an issue. Just the fielding a consistent 11 is an issue, because how often did we see Wilfred Nancy come out every game last year and pretty much name the same,
mm,
at the very least, 8 or 9 players? There may be a
exactly.
couple of changes in there. And now it's fascinating too, because they got Vaughn Asuri in the Canadian Championship. And look, you expect them to win,
Mm.
but based on how poorly they've started the season, we could see a cup upset here very, very
Yeah.
early.
Definitely, I mean, they're not exactly brimming with confidence going into a game where Vaughan will, a very very successful side in League One Ontario, so they'll go into the game at least knowing that there's cracks in this team that they can take advantage of. And you obviously touched on there the Cornwall Miller trade, and it was astounding, like reading as that as that announcement came out, to think that they're giving away Kamal Miller plus $1.4 million in GAM with Bryce
Yeah.
Duke and Ariel Lassiter. Part of me is wondering how much this has to do with the relationship maybe with Kamal Miller and the style of play that Hernan Losada wants to play. He's quite a good. He builds out of the back quite well. Kamal Miller, pretty decent with his feet. It doesn't seem like that's very much is get it forward quickly. It's a very different shift to some of what Nancy did, and maybe he was looking for a move elsewhere from there due to not feeling particularly happy in the system. But it does seem like they've kind of overpaid for. I mean, I enjoy Ariel Lassiter, a nice little impact player every so often, but I think Montreal have that kind those. I mean, they have players who'll put in a good performance every few games at times. And Bryce Duke, and again, another relatively decent midfielder in MLS, but he's not the highest quality. He's not the number 10 that you're going to go out and get who's going to make things change like Mihailovic did.
No, exactly. And I do think that trading Kamal Miller isn't outlandish. Like, people were shocked overall that Kamal Miller was even traded in general. But I do believe that, first of all, he was supposedly wanting a new contract from Montreal. Montreal weren't willing to give it to him just because he had a year left on his deal plus an option year. They were looking to sell him. So therefore, I do feel like the writing was maybe on the wall in that regard, and that he was going to leave probably this summer, because that seemed to be when most of his suitors wanted him overseas, which makes sense. That's when preseason is, right? So then the case became, all right, we're not playing well. Kamal wants out. He wants a new contract. We're not going to give it to him. This might be your best avenue to improve the roster. Plus the fact that he maybe doesn't fit in as well stylistically anymore probably just lend credence to, you know what, let's just pull the trigger. But the fact that they got that return for him in Ariel Lassiter, Bryce Duke, plus they had to give up GAM.
Yeah.
Keep in mind too, Mike, over the offseason, Montreal were also asking for allocation money in exchange for a Kamal Miller trade within MLS. And the rationale behind that was, well, he's going to leave anyways. Maybe we could get some more money back and then use that within MLS to exploit a market that we've actually exploited quite well. They probably didn't get the asking price they wanted, hence why he ended up staying. So this isn't the first time we've seen these sort of rumblings before. They've been trying to trade him for months. And so the fact that they finally pulled the trigger, but for it to be that sort of package in the end, you're thinking to yourself, well, did you really make the necessary improvements you wanted based on what you gave up? And you probably have to say on paper, no, you haven't.
So losing a big player like Kamal Miller, but he brought in Bryce Duke there, and last, as we said, they're trying to include these young players as they have done as a club for a while now. Who's really taken a little bit of a step for you that you're starting to think, as the games go by, I can see them adding a little bit more and a little bit more to this team than maybe we're not seeing right now?
It's a good question. I don't mind the looks of Sean Rea. I think the only thing he really needs to hone in on a bit more is maybe just the risk taking, as I sort of touched on off the top. And that, like, I understand he is still, what is he? He's 20 years old. I think he turns 21 very soon. It's his first MLS season. He took a lot of steps forward in the CPL in the 2 years he was there. The first year, he showed flashes, right? But it wasn't always consistent. Last year, he was consistently one of the top chance creators and best playmakers in the league. I feel like this year, we're almost going to see a similar trend in that we'll see flashes. You'll realize, oh yeah, that's what he can provide. And then eventually, maybe in year two, that's when you really see him take on another step. I also do think that he maybe doesn't entirely fit into how Losada wants to play. He's been going straight 3-4-3 a lot of the time. And I feel like as a result of that, he's often been shuttled out to the wing, which he's kind of comfortable doing, but maybe doesn't have the creative freedom to drift inside as often. So I feel like that might be the one tweak we could see to be able to extract more of his qualities.
Yeah, I think from like the bits we saw from Valor, I've seen the CPL. He's great at finding his little pockets of space. He's not just right, you're a winger, or right, you're a number 10, stay in the middle.
Mhm.
He can drift around and find those spaces. Maybe he needs a tweak in the system that maybe like similar to what they had before with like the one striker and the two attacking midfielders on the Nancy at times, or the two forwards, and let him have more of a freedom. But it'll be interesting to see what they can do. And I mean, we touch on that. What can they actually salvage though? These young players may get time. Is this what this season now is for CF Montreal to prepare players for next year, or can they really make? I mean, we've got an expanded playoff season. It's still very early in the year. Ninth place gets you in the playoffs. Is this something that they can still think, right, there's time to turn this around, or thoughts on 2023 or 2024 already?
I think you can maybe try to salvage the season a little bit. It seems like that's what they're trying to do by trading Kamal Miller. We can argue about the return till the cows come home, but it does seem like they're still trying to salvage something. I feel like until it looks pretty bleak for them, which may come, let's say, around August time, we're probably going to see them trying to push on and try to salvage, at least get back into the playoffs. I think that is currently the plan. But I think overall, this is also the first, I think, repeat of the cycle we've seen with Olivier Renard in charge of sporting operations, where they've acquired a lot of players from within the league. They've exploited that market very well. Alistair Johnston comes in, Georgia Mihailovic comes in. Kamal Miller was an intra-league trade as well. So they've brought in those players. They've sold them on. They've started to bring in some younger players. Ismail Kone was maybe one of the first to really break out and then eventually get sold. So now they're trying to repeat the cycle again of, okay, can we do this a second time? And that seems to be their strategy. So I think year one is always going to be difficult whenever you're trying to do this. Obviously, as we've seen, maybe not this difficult, but certainly you will face some obstacles. So I think that's really what they're going to try to do is, if they want to stay the course, then you're going to have to be smart with it. And I don't know if the Kamal Miller trade is maybe the first good step of that, but
Yeah.
I do feel like that's also going to really show us, hey, look, is Montreal really going to follow this strategy to the T, or are they going to deviate from it because of external pressures? We'll see.
Yeah, it's interesting. Do you say them for Hernan Lasada? It's a very difficult start to the year, but you've said there's a huge rotation. There's another year of trying to get things back on track. Do you think then that he's going to be given maybe the full season to really try and start to include, or could there be some quick decisions made in the next few months, do you think, if things don't change?
You never know with Joey Saputo. That's the thing. You know, he can be super trigger happy and he can be patient when you don't expect him to be patient. I do think the fact that he has had to pay off a few coaches recently, pay the severance, they're losing money as well. I think he's probably going to be a little bit cautious in terms of maybe pressing the trigger a bit too early. Like I feel he's going to give Losada until maybe the summer, let's say around June, July time. If you don't see any notable progress, like think Chris Armas in Toronto. If it's clearly not working, if it's clearly a disaster, then you have no choice. You have to bite the bullet. But I do think that at the very least, that DC game was a slight improvement from what we've seen. They did outshoot a team for, I think it was only the second time this season. They dominated possession. They did put up some decent chances, just didn't get a lot of shots on target. So if they can continue to show some positive strides, I do think he's going to be given, at the very least, a slightly longer leash.
Yeah. Well, let's move a little bit further down, sticking in the same conference, but aside with very different ambitions this season. Toronto FC, only the one loss, but draws just keep going.
Yes.
6 draws in 8, 1 win, 1 defeat. And that one defeat was on opening day, so it's been a great run in some when it comes to regards to they're still picking up points. But what are we actually getting from this side at the moment? It just seems like they just can't quite get over, like, to dominate the side that little bit more than they need to.
Yeah, it's almost funny too, because I feel their problems from last year, it's now the inverse in that they couldn't keep goals out. They had no problem scoring. They couldn't keep goals out. Now it's the inverse this year in that they're doing pretty well defensively. I know that against Atlanta, they conceded 2, but overall, they've actually been a lot better defensively, which I didn't entirely expect, just because you have all that change on the back line. You bring in a new goalkeeper, Sean Johnson, who's been okay, to his credit. Maybe not to the goalkeeper of the year caliber from New York City that we've seen, but at the very least manageable, right? And then offensively, they just haven't really gotten it going yet. And part of that is, I don't know if they have the right number 9 in the door right now. DeAndre Kerr, look, bless his soul, he's making the right runs, he's doing everything he can. I don't think he's a number 9. I think he's perfectly suited as a sort of like a number 8 or winger tweener type sort of hybrid role, I feel. And Adama Diomande has not been good enough. He looks very sluggish. That's going to be expected because he hasn't played in a while. So the fact that you now have a hamstrung budget because Jonathan Osorio now counts as a third designated player, which limits your options a lot, it means that you don't really have a reliable go-to target up front, which can change things. Just ask Bayern Munich.
Exactly.
I mean, they've had issues trying to break down the bigger teams or the stronger teams. And Toronto FC, I feel, is going to have similar issues, in that they're probably going to be in games just because defensively they've been a lot more stingy, but offensively, are they going to get it going? And we've also seen some notable improvements from Marc-Anthony Kaye, which has been massive. Jonathan Osorio still playing well. Richie Larea had a terrific game even outside of the goal against Atlanta. Yeah. So a lot of players are having stronger seasons than last year, but now you got to get the final third execution in there. And I just don't think they have the personnel to be able to do that. Plus Insigne has been hurt, which has probably not helped either. But I do think that the lack of a 9 is going to be a bit of an issue.
Yeah, like you say, Insigne came off the bench this weekend, so this is another player back on quite a small squad when it comes to sort of first team experienced players. They did pick your brains on some of these younger players that are coming through. Hopefully, Jordan Peruzza started up front against Atlanta. Alonso Coelho in midfield. We spoke about previously how they've got this starting lineup and they need them fit all the time, but these young players are coming in now. Are they showing signs of being sort of MLS ready?
I think Jaquil Marshall-Ruddy has always shown flashes. We saw him get the assist against Atlanta over the weekend. His biggest issue has just been staying fit and staying focused, I think has really been the number one problem. And you forget too, he is still 18 years old, which is nuts to think about. I think he turns 19 very soon, but even still, he's someone who can probably play a pretty big part, even as a fullback. Like if you want to have maybe a little more dynamism in the final third, play him as a left back if you want. We kind of saw the impact he can make in that role over the weekend. There are a lot of high hopes for the likes of Kobe Franklin. We saw what Kosi Thompson could do last year, albeit out of position from where he's normally played. There are a few decent young players that you can look at and say, yeah, like they can probably offer something here. But I think for the most part, they're still waiting for someone. I think maybe in that, trying to think if there's even been recent players. That's the problem with Toronto, is that really for the most part, they haven't had any real breakthrough youngsters come through and solidify first team spots because they've been so focused on trying to build a winning squad. And by building a winning squad, they're trying to go for the pizzazz rather than the development route. Yeah. So that's probably something that they still have to work on. But there are a couple of players who at the very least could be, if not every day, say impact substitutes, at the very least can still do enough to feature regularly in the matchday squads.
Yeah. I was to see how they're going. Their midfield, obviously you mentioned their Marc-Anthony Kaye playing well, Jonathan Osorio there. And the three of them with Michael Bradley was quite key last year, going into the end of the year and trying to get them all together at the same time and all three on form at the same time. And it was a bit of a struggle, but they brought in Brandon Savania from FC Dallas, and he's been putting in some good performances that really shown. Yeah, we've lost the striker in Jesus Jimenez, but we've added some depth here, and we've added someone a bit different as well. And he capped off a really well created goal against Atlanta on the weekend, and he looks like a really exciting player in that midfield as well to add.
Yeah, and they were lacking a little bit of dynamism in the midfield, maybe Kaye, possibly Osorio aside, because we all know Michael Bradley is getting up there in age. He's going to be 36 before the end of the season. He's definitely not as dynamic as he once was. So the fact that you now have even just another option to replace the Kays or the Osorios of the world, I think is huge. And the fact that he is coming in and he's getting goals, getting assists, you can see that he is very intelligent with when he chooses to make certain runs. He is defensively responsible, tracking back as well. So that to me is crucial, because if there's one area in general that Toronto FC is lacking in, it is depth and quality. But in the midfield, which is where they probably had issues last year, they've at least solved that with Cervania coming in. And that was a pretty astute trade, even though they had to give up some striker depth in order to shore it up. I do think that, look, you can usually find a fairly serviceable striker, especially when you've got the players around him that you would have.
Exactly.
But sometimes finding a young, energetic midfielder like that, it can be hard to come by, especially a domestic one too.
Yeah. And how are Toronto going to start turning these draws into wins then? If we talk about how they're lacking that number 9, with Insigne coming back, do we think that the movement of these two Italian players, the improvements in midfield getting forward, it doesn't really matter too much, that this number 9 isn't going to be a 10, 15 goal scorer a year?
Probably that's the way they're going to have to go. We know that Osorio is very capable of chipping in offensively when he needs to. So there's maybe one extra runner. I imagine they're going to try to get Lorea more involved in and around the penalty area, because we know that he likes to cut inside on the dribble or just drive into the box in general and really cause problems that way. And then whether it's Petretto or it's Marshall Ruddy or whoever the candidate happens to be at left back, they'll probably have to get pretty involved as well. We know Bernardeschi and Insigne do like to cut inside and tend to dictate things in those half spaces, which means the fullbacks will have to stay wide, closer to the touchline to provide width. So I imagine that they're going to work with, almost in unison together. And then K will combine on a triangle with probably, you would imagine, Insigne and Petretto or Marshall Ruddy, Osorio on the other side with Lorea and Bernardeschi. And then they'll try to free themselves up that way. And I do imagine that one of those guys, probably Bernardeschi, will end up being the pseudo number 9 anyways. If they had a free DP spot, I think it'd be a pretty simple solution. Try to find someone in the summer, bring them in, and then your problem is solved. But they don't have that option, unfortunately, for them.
No, I guess thinking how you mentioned Insigne and Bernardeschi want to come inside. Maybe they just need that one big striker who's going to just make the pitch as big as possible and force the centre backs back and just be busy, maybe not score many goals, but just be as busy as possible, just to create a little bit of space on the edge of the box. And because we know how dangerous they can be. But is MLS Cup a realistic goal still? Looking at this side, just one defeat on opening day, so defensively so improved, like we've mentioned, but can they get the goals that will take them all the way?
I figured they would be around a 4 or 5 seed before the season started and maybe win a round in the playoffs. But I do think the fact that they might struggle offensively, at least for now, this could obviously change. Maybe they end up finding a solution and bring in a number 9 who ends up being quite solid. Ayo Akinola could be that guy for all we know, right? I don't have confidence he will be, but I'm ready for him to prove me wrong, to be honest. So I think because of that, you're going to see them trip up at some point. They're going to be a tough out for teams because, as we've seen in every game, they haven't really been dominated in any game so far this season, which you can't really say last year or the year before that. So at least they're making positive steps forward, but I don't think MLS Cup is their ceiling. I think their ceiling might be getting to the second round of the postseason, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, you said their defeat probably was against the weakest team they've played, I guess, in that opening day of the season.
That's
against
right.
DC United. So they've been playing decent teams, Atlanta twice, New England. They've now sorry, not New England. They've got Philadelphia next. They're at home. They're away. The New York City and New England. So it's a really tough sort of next 3 games to really have to deal with. And I guess how they cope with those games might show us a little bit more about, are they one of those sort of 5 and up, or are they looking at 5 down to 9 sort of position at the end of the season?
And that's the beauty of MLS, right? As long as you stay in the hunt, all of a sudden 2-3 wins in a row, you're suddenly second place up from 7th or 8th, right? So I mean, as long as they stay in the fight, and that is a good point in that they have played some pretty tough teams so far and they've held their own. It's just that in those one-off games where, and look, maybe they can grind their way, kind of Croatia their way to a final, right? It's very possible, but I wouldn't really put it past them considering how good New England's looked. We all know that Philly is pretty loaded. there are a lot of teams with some pretty significant firepower in the East.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see. Let's go across to the West then. And so the Vancouver Whitecaps had a pretty humbling 6-0 defeat on aggregate to LAFC in the Champions League. But that sort of brings that to an end, and they can focus back on MLS. And other sides have struggled, like Philadelphia are much lower than we would have expected with their CCL campaign. LFC probably just a complete outlier to everything at the moment. But to still be sitting at 8th in the West after going through these 2 rounds, I think they're now on 3. They had 3 clean sheets in a row in MLS. They're putting themselves in a pretty decent place going into this bye week on the weekend to sort of recover and get themselves back ready.
Yeah, Vancouver's a very intriguing team because if you look at the numbers in general, especially offensively, they're near the top of the league in pretty much every metric you look at. Expected goals, shots, open play shots, set piece, expected goals, even if you want to go that far as well. And they have made defensive improvements. Takaoka has been a tremendous upgrade in goal, which has seen them have a pretty dramatic swing in terms of positive goal differential this season. Because last year, I'm pretty sure that combined all Whitecaps goalkeepers, I think they saved like 11 goals below expected. And I think Takaoka so far is about a goal above expected. So 12 goal swing just like that. If you can maintain that over the course of an entire year, you're talking not only a playoff team, you're talking maybe a home playoff game to start the first round, maybe push for the top 2. That could be a bit ambitious, but that to me is why I do have confidence in the Whitecaps, because we've now seen a 7 or 8 game sample size, albeit against some of the weaker teams in the league. Well, let's see if they can keep this going against the LAFCs and pretty much take your pick here. But if they can just get their finishing right, because that's really been the one thing that's haunted them. And I know that's such a simplistic way to look at it, but it really is the case. If they were just able to put teams away, they probably would be top of the West right now, just based on how they started games for the first 60, 70 minutes in every match they've played. So I think as long as they get the finishing and defensively that this keeps going, because they do have maybe 1 or 2 concerns, particularly aerially, they have been exposed a lot this year, then I think that they're going to be in pretty good shape for the rest of the season. But the fact that they are still in 8th, despite having to play every 3 days to start the season so far, and now that that's over and they're probably going to get a little bit of respite in that way, I am pretty confident that they can end up going a bit further up the table here, maybe getting a home playoff date, I think will be what they can realistically aim for.
Yeah, let's talk about Takaoka and the defense first, like that end of the pitch. Like him, Blackman and Veselinovic have sort of created this really good like trio at the back and the center there. And not just his shot stopping and his facing shots, he's so much better on the ball that they just seem a little bit more calmer at the back than they were maybe when in possession with Cody Croper. And Hassal at times, they just seem a little bit less like they're right on the edge of a full-on panic, which happened far too often, which would have led to some of these goals last year. And having those 3 midfielders in this sort of Christmas tree formation that he likes to play, they're really hard to break through. Like you say, dealing with crosses and the aerial balls, there needs to be improvement, but they have limited sides actually getting into the box and like causing them problems that way, haven't they?
They have. And I think the one common denominator we see with some of the top teams in the league is if your number 6 is elite, then chances are your team is going to be elite. And Andres Cubas, we have to say, is probably one of the top players in his position in MLS. And he's been fantastic since he joined. And now that he's had a full preseason, he started the campaign, you see the massive difference he's made. Yes, they had to upgrade a goalkeeper. They maybe had to fill in 1 or 2 holes defensively, but they've done all that. Plus you got Cubas. Plus, you got options like Shaw. Ali Ahmed's looked really good in the midfield so far whenever he's swapped between left back and sort of a left-sided midfield role. Julian Gressel's been outstanding in a midfield role as well. All of that will mean that from top to bottom, you're going to be a well-run unit. And defensively, maybe aerially, that, as I said, that is the one still Achilles heel they have, but they're not as easy to play through anymore, which is, I think, really massive. They've cut down on the amount of transitions they've given up, the amount of counterattacking shots they've conceded, the amount of shots overall they've conceded. Might not be as impressive as their attack, but they're still well above average in most metrics in MLS defensively. And you have to say that if they can maintain that across the entire season, plus get some finishing on the other side, you can't really complain about that.
No, yeah, and looking then at the other ends, like they're just for me, they had that game against Montreal with the go down to 10 men early and were able to then just enjoy a bit of attack versus defense for the game. They knock in 5 goals, and I thought, okay, it's a little bit easier. Montreal are very like confidence stricken and down to 10 men, but it's going to maybe bring a little bit more of a confidence and a bit of a boost and a bit more free flowing movement around there. But I'm still seeing, for me personally, with this sort of 2 players behind the main striker, whether it be White or Betcher at times, those 2 attacking midfielders or attacking forwards want to do the same thing as each other every time. No, they don't have a player who's going to stretch and run in behind or create different movements, both whether it be Vite, Gould, Dahome. They want to turn, they've so often got their back to goal and they want the ball and then they turn. And it just seems like Brian White's very much left on his own for so much going, well, you can battle, you can do it. Don't worry, we have faith in you to fight those defenders all game long. With Betcher, it's like, oh, you'll run, that's fine. He's not the most explosive striker, but he'll run, but he'll get bullied a bit more. And it just seems like that striker's always just a little bit isolated. And like I say, that Montreal game, you had White and Betcher together, but they were 10 men and they were a bit of a mess. And you thought, well, they are linking up. Could this happen? But I don't think Sartini really knows what he wants from those front 3 at the moment.
Yeah, that's where I wonder if maybe David Caicedo could be the answer, because he's just come back from injury. He is a player who will make runs into the box and try to get himself into the box. Maybe that's the solution. Pedro Vite, having seen him at Independiente many times, he's not going to be that kind of player. Ryan Gaul, we know, kind of likes to drift across the pitch, occasionally get into the box, but for the most part, he'll be the main deliverer of the ball going into the box.
Yeah.
So you take him out of the equation. Christian Dahome, he, to me, could fill that role, but far too... In transition, we know that he's going to be very direct and try to get into the box. When you're building up intricately, I'm not sure he can do that. And that is the problem, as you say. So I feel like maybe Caicedo could be the answer there. Otherwise, you maybe just try to roll with 2 forwards and try to figure it out that way. Just have Gauld do his thing in behind them. That could be the answer. But the fact that we are talking about this, like, this is the difference between Toronto, for example, and Vancouver. Vancouver has the depth, and yet they don't know really how to use it. Toronto's almost like, oh my God, can we please have maybe they can negotiate a trade. Who knows? But that to me is what's so fascinating, is that Vancouver has this luxury and they haven't quite figured out maybe necessarily how to get the most out of the attack, as impressive as it's looked this year.
Yeah, we said before the season that starting 11 looks really good. I had questions over, like, well, we're moving Gressel into the midfield now. He's moving away from that right wing back role, like that he's been so successful at, but it's really worked. But Sartini still has the fullbacks are consistently rotated. The players behind the striker. So there is you mentioned there that they're not quite sure on exactly what they want, but is there so much rotation that players aren't actually getting that ability to get 2-3 games under their belt and say, right, okay, this is my position, or lose the position?
Yeah, unless your name is, say, Yohei Takaoka, Ranko Veselinovic, probably Gressel, Gauld, and now Blackman, chances are you're going to, and I guess Andres Cubas as well, chances are you're going to be rotated out.
Yeah.
Right, at some point. And that to me is like, it's always twofold, because we saw it work when Sartini first got in the door, because I think players were really trying to prove to the new coach, of course, that, hey, I should be here. I'm going to work my hardest. But the more you do it, the more it disrupts things, right? It's totally fine if you want to keep the spine of your team intact and then rotate around it. That's totally fine. But when you start to change the midfield combinations, the center back partnerships, the fullback combinations, because wingers and fullbacks tend to have a good rapport with each other, even the forwards, that's when you have problems.
Yeah.
So I think that's something he really does have to figure out, because we've seen it even earlier on in the campaign, obviously with LAFC and the Champions League coming in, they had to rotate. Yeah. That's fair enough. But when they had 2 MLS games in a row and they kept the same 11, you just saw the synchronicity was working to a T because everybody knew where each other was going to be. They would play a no look pass or spin around and play a long pass in behind the defense, and they knew that someone was going to make that run, get in behind, and then do their thing from there.
Yeah.
So that all those little things do come into it for sure.
Yeah, it's still, I guess now that the CCL is over, we might see a little bit more of that in certain positions, like the likes of maybe Ryan Raposo might solidify a left back or a right back spot. Laborda's come in. He's more of a centre back playing at right back, defensively good, attacking wise. It's never been his game as a young player. So there's still questions on each one of those fullbacks. Maybe we'll start to see Sartini decide, okay, actually this player's best in this spot. And those young players, you've mentioned Ali Ahmed already, and I wanted to sort of highlight him. I mean, Betcher's taken some of the headlines for breaking records for scoring so quickly. But Ali Ahmed just has been he came in, I assumed he was going to be sort of like the backup left back to start the season.
Right, yeah.
He's coming as a number 8, and he just doesn't stop, and he looks so composed when he's on the ball. He looks like he has a full understanding of the position, about how he's working with his other 2 central midfielders, and it's such an incredible rise he's had from sort of playing sort of amateur soccer.
Yeah, I mean, he was with the MLS Next Pro team until basically a few weeks ago, and now here he is just bossing midfields. I mean, you looked at him in the Montreal game and thought, okay, well, that's against 10 men. Montreal's not very good. Their midfield's a disaster. Fair enough. He's probably going to have a good game. But then he comes in against LAFC. Yes, in a difficult situation where they're already down by a couple of goals in the first leg. And then, as we know, in the second leg, they're already well behind.
Yeah.
But looks very comfortable, looks very composed, knows which runs to make, understands where to be positioned. And while he's getting involved offensively, you can see in his mind, he's still kind of looking around, surveying the pitch, realizing, okay, if we give up possession, where should I position myself to make sure that we're not exposed on the counter? And that's very impressive for a young player with such little professional experience. The only 2 things that he should work on, and this is going to come with time.
Yeah.
You can see in one-on-one duels that he is out-muscled quite often, but that's very easy. You can go work yourself in the gym, build up some muscle, and then you have no problems from there. The second one is he is very defensively responsible. We do see that he never stops running, but I do wonder if maybe he could almost conserve his energy in a way.
Yeah.
Because we see that he has the stamina, we see he has the endurance, we see he's willing to work hard, but that's only going to serve you so well. Like if you're constantly running around, then you can get exposed in that way. And I feel like if Ahmed just maybe, almost lets the ball do the work in a lot of ways, that could really help him going forward as well. Because everything else is there. And you honestly can't teach a lot of the traits that he has, especially the composure when he's being closed down by 2 players at once. He somehow wriggles his way free, plays in a progressive pass, knows where to make a run towards the box. It's all very impressive so far.
Yeah, like you say, and I was watching that the Austin game on the weekend. I got going into half time. I thought he seems like he's tiring. Maybe I thought I can imagine him coming off early in the second half, maybe, but he carries on, and at no point did he ever stop. Like you say, maybe he needs to reserve this, but you can see how much he's really taken this opportunity, and he's become a really, really exciting prospect for the Whitecaps in really short space of time.
Yeah, and even with Canada, and this is where I look and think, okay, where should his future position be? Because I feel like there's 2 conflicting issues here. Canada, as we know, is very well set on left-sided players.
Yeah.
Right? So if he plays left back regularly, okay, great. He's getting regular minutes for the Whitecaps, but then when it comes to the national team picture, he maybe can't, find his way into the team. But if he were to get a spot in the midfield, where Canada probably has a lack of younger options in those positions, even as a number 8 or a number 6, that could be the way to go for him. But you have Alessandro Schopf, you have Andres Cubas, you got Julian Gressel, you've even got Russell Tybert, who, as we know, is a mainstay there, and maybe he may not have the quality of those other players, but he has the experience. He's going to get games. So it's going to be tough to break through in the midfield. But to Ahmed's credit, he's been able to do it, and now he is becoming a more and more reliable option for Sartini. So if he can end up locking down a spot in the midfield, that would be great for his club future as well as his potential international future too.
Yeah, it's going to be an exciting for him to see where he can take this. And then again, they, like you say, they are a really intriguing side, and we'll take Montreal out of it now. They'll compete at some point, you'd imagine later this year. But with Toronto and Vancouver now, who have you got the most sort of faith in going forward to putting in to getting the furthest, let's say, like in the playoffs come the end of the year, assuming you think both will be there?
It's a great question. I would lean Vancouver, because I think they have, when we look at the two pillars of each team, offense and then obviously defending, we know the issues for Toronto FC are attacking based. I feel Vancouver, everything from probably their own box, you could say, apart from obviously those aerial issues, all the way up until the opposition box.
Yeah.
They've got it solved. They've got it sorted. Everything's there. It's now just about the finishing. And how are they going to fare against the stronger teams in the Western Conference? That is maybe still the one big concern I would have with Vancouver, is can this translate to those stronger teams in the league? Especially against an LAFC where, you're not dealing with 3 days rest and then having to rotate and whatnot. But I do have more faith in Vancouver, because based on the body of work I've seen, just in terms of how complete the team is, I would say Vancouver has the best shot. Plus, I feel the West is quite wide open. Like a lot of the top teams, St. Louis has been a complete shock to everybody. Yeah. Seattle looks like they're back to their old selves. We'll see if St. Louis, can keep it up. You would imagine Seattle's going to be one of those top two teams in the league. After that, it's pretty wide open.
Yeah.
So if anything, the fact that the West is still quite, it's still quite an open book, I think that could give Vancouver quite an advantage too.
Yeah, definitely. I think, like, from memory, they seem to pick up players in the summer as well, a little bit more than maybe some of the other other two sides in MLS. So we might see something a little bit come in to add to that attack partway through the season, or to bolster one of these other areas, to think, okay, well, now they can really make a push for something. So we'll have to see. But yeah, it's exciting times for some, worrying times for others, depending on which part of the country you're from. But it's an entertaining start for Canadian teams in MLS. Peter, thank you so much for joining us once again. Great to get your insights on those three sides in Canada.
Yeah, always a lot of fun to chat, Mike. Thank you.